The Director of Liberty, Shami Chakrabarti, thinks we should all be concerned about the creeping power of the secret state. This is her take of the week.
I feel like I'm being watched. And soon I'll have something much more concerning than a few glass eyes to worry about after the Home Secretary's breathtaking attack on internet security. Our every move is already tracked by CCTV cameras, but if the draft Investigatory Powers Bill becomes law, we won't be safe from the prying eyes of government and the police on the internet, in our own homes. Why should I care? I keep myself to myself. I'm an honest citizen, I hear you cry. But surely, this level of government intrusion simply isn't acceptable in a modern democracy. Companies will be forced to keep a record of every website you visit, with no need for a judge's warrant. They say it's the same as an itemised phone bill. But would you feel comfortable with a stranger standing behind you while you looked online for medical advice or signed into your online dating profile? So far, so 1984. This is a chilling invasion of personal privacy, all in the name of protecting us from terrorism. But no amount of fear of terrorist or cyber attack can justify turning us all into suspects. And that's what this bill does. In fact, this legislation will leave us at risk of being watched online by malevolent forces, not just benign ones. We should all be scared of measures that leave us more permanently vulnerable to hacking from fraudsters and terrorists. And can government really be trusted to keep hold of all of this information? We may be a long way from the travails of Winston Smith, but we're too far down a slippery slope that I, for one, don't want to slide further down. So the Eyes might end up having it in the House of Commons, but I'm standing against this dangerous intrusion into all of our private lives.
And from the Museum of the College of Optometrists to our own collection of dusty old artefacts. Shami joins us now. Welcome back on the programme. Alan, let me come to you first. I take it from the remarks you've already made that you do not agree with Shami that this is, quote, a chilling intrusion into all our privacy.
No, I don't. The government has the power, and the agencies and the police have the power to track telephone calls. The Post, I've pointed out in Parliament, in 1969, they stinged open 250,000 letters. There was a whole room in Post Office headquarters where MI5 did that. They've always had these powers. The issue is that now there's social media, there's new technology, the powers do not relate to those. We're stuck in the past. And when I was Home Secretary, if we'd have won the 2010 general election, Prime Minister, everyone concerned, our priority would be to plug these gaps. Now, I think Theresa May, partly because of the work of Shami and others, you remember there was a draft bill in 2012 under the coalition government. It didn't go any further. She commissioned 3 independent reports. All of those independent reports said that the powers that that the agencies have at the moment are correct, but they fall short. But they made a number of other points, including the important point of judicial oversight. When Secretary of State, Home Secretary,
which is judges that agree to the warrant.
Judges actually agree to the warrant as well.
So it's a little muddied by what Mrs.
Theresa
May's
May,
proposing.
well, yeah, it's a draft bill and it's there for pre-legislative scrutiny. you know, I'm not a cheerleader for Theresa May, but I thought she did very well to bring these things together in a measured way. And I saw Liberty's 8-point plan, and I think Theresa May has tried. Shami will say she hasn't addressed all of them, but she's tried, and she's certainly addressed the concerns expressed by David Anderson, who is the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation.
Shami, I'll get you to reply in just a minute. Let me just see, first of all, Michael, what's your view?
I thought Shami's film failed to address what needs to be done to tackle terrorism. In other words, it was very strong on, you know, why we might need to fear this. But what about the counter fear of what will happen if we don't have sufficient powers to find out what would-be terrorists are going to do? I agree with Shami less than I used to. I think the situation has deteriorated. And I rather think that Edward Snowden's activities have either pushed us further in this direction because they have compromised methodologies so that terrorists know more about what we are doing and what we can do, or at the very least they've given people the excuse to push on further because that can be claimed. I'm not saying this is without risks. I mean, for example, many of these powers fall to the police, and unfortunately we know that some policemen have sold secrets to newspapers for money regarding celebrities and so on, and I can perfectly see that that sort of thing is possible and will happen.
I'm going to come on to the powers of the police in a minute, because I think that's an area a lot of people have been worried about. But Shami, tell them why they're wrong.
Well, for a start, if it is accepted, and I think there is a growing consensus that there should be a greater role for judges in deciding whether it is warranted to intrude on somebody's privacy. I think there has been, I'm afraid, a huge PR exercise in advance of the publication of this bill, and having actually looked at the draft legislation and not just the newspaper reports that preceded it and the spin and the puff, there is no judicial warrantry in this bill. There is a very limited judicial review of warrants that are still signed by politicians and not judges. And I think that a lot of the understandable response from perhaps from Alan and others that Theresa May has moved in this direction, that was being briefed and that has been written about.
You don't think
I don't think it's actually delivered in the detail of this legislation, and that really concerns me because, and it's all very well to say Edward Snowden is a villain and he's compromised national security, but we wouldn't even be having this debate about the need for new powers and where the balance should lie but for his revelations.
Really,
because, of course,
you and I have had it for years.
Yeah, but no,
long before
what he revealed is that notwithstanding the debates we've been having for years, and notwithstanding legislation that fell under the last Labour government because it didn't have popular support, a lot of blanket surveillance, bulk surveillance, and the word bulk appears in the draft legislation itself. So Mr Burnham may say there's no mass surveillance, but the word bulk surveillance is used.
Okay, Alan?
But for Snowden, we wouldn't even know.
That's because you don't know who's going to commit these crimes. If you don't ask the telco companies to, for instance, to keep all of this information, you have to have the haystack to look for the needle. And the security services just couldn't operate on the basis that, we will only keep the data of bad people or people likely to commit crimes. So you have to have, but it's metadata. It's not you need a warrant to actually look at it. But what I can't understand, Shami, why don't you think there's judicial oversight? I was quite surprised that Theresa May had gone as far as she did, because there was this argument about it's elected politicians who are responsible, who are accountable, who should be signing this. She said the Secretary of State should sign it, and then a judge should sign it before that warrant becomes... There are emergency circumstances, I know, they have to be clearly defined.
What's the answer to that, Jen?
The answer is clause 19.2 of the bill. I don't know if you've read it, I have. So there's been all this spin about double locks, yeah? The politician goes first and then
So what's the reality?
So the reality is the politician makes the judgment, and a judge is allowed to review the judgment and can only intervene on very, very limited grounds, on judicial review grounds. In other words, if the politician is bonkers or has been completely procedurally improper in the way he's looked at the decision. And a proper judicial warrant, as they have in the United States and all over the free world, allows a judge to actually make the decision about whether there's sufficient suspicion or evidence to warrant this intrusion.
It's a judicial review of every single warrant before they actually become effective.
So the politician issues the warrant.
If that's what
the
you call a
politician
judicial
issues
review.
the warrant You're saying, but the warrant can't be used until a judge has approved the
But
warrant.
he can't make a different decision. He can only interfere with the politician's decision on very,
But they have
very
to make
limited
sure it's
grounds.
lawful.
No, but you're not understanding my point. What we're talking about here is there sufficient suspicion?
But I suppose that, since this is a draft bill,
Yeah.
and Mrs May, in a sense, is in a negotiating position.
Indeed.
And she didn't particularly want judicial review anyway, that is something she will be under pressure to tighten up.
I certainly hope so.
I want to ask you, I understand, I think most people probably wouldn't agree with Shami. They would think the security services should have access to the metadata and should be able to get to see browsing history if it was required. Why should the police get to see anybody's web browsing history simply on the say-so of a middle-ranking officer?
Well, police are crucial in this. This is not just about terrorism. This is about organised crime.
Yeah.
It's about paedophilia. It's about, if you listen to the experts who plot and track child exploitation.
Should they need a warrant? If they've got suspicion...
They need a warrant to search your home.
They don't need a warrant. But under this, they would only a
Exactly.
middle-ranking police officer could do it. Now, you just think of the circumstances you could see there. The police have arrested somebody, and they think he's guilty, or she's guilty, but they can't quite get them to confess. So the middle rank goes, well, let's just have a look at your browsing history, shall we? And let's see. They may find something totally unrelated to the case, but it could be highly embarrassing. They could use that to...
It's a fair point, Andrew. I think, the police need to have access to this data. Maybe there should be a higher authority in the police.
Judges should sign warrants. But one final question, hacking. What hasn't been talked enough about yet, the new power in this bill will allow hacking of entire
What do you mean
networks.
is the security services going on to people's phones?
People's
and
devices, people's
and-
networks, people's servers.
But they would need a warrant for that.
Well, not a judge's warrant. It's the same kind of warrant that I've just described. It's a politician's warrant that a judge can only interfere with on very limited grounds. And here's my concern
Alan
about
and I
hacking.
both signed politicians' warrants.
hold on, let them-
But here's my
Well,
concern.
I don't think it's a
Hold on,
knockout.
I'll come back.
I don't think it's a
Fine.
knockout argument saying it's a politician's warrant. I mean,
Well, this is
you
what-
took it seriously, I took it seriously. We take it very seriously when we sign these warrants.
And David Anderson and his predecessor have pointed out, actually, this is a bit...
He asked for a judicial
this
warrant
is something
in his
that
report.
Yes, he did, but he said this is something that hasn't gone wrong. There's
But on
no
hacking-
cases
Okay.
But-
of
but on
politicians not
hacking-
taking it
But
seriously.
on hacking, the danger with hacking that's even graver than just listening is that when the authorities effectively damage the security of a network, granted for laudable reasons because they want to listen and their investigation is over, that network is potentially permanently undermined. And then because you've interfered with the network, and then subsequently all sorts of other people.
But they've been doing... We learned from Mrs May yesterday they've been doing that already.
And do we think this is?
But we have no evidence.
And you
of it.
don't.
But in what ways the network been damaged?
Because what makes hacking different from just intercepting is you're actually interfering with the infrastructure to a point where you leave that network vulnerable to hacking by other people subsequently.
Is that
and
the
you don't even
malevolent
know.
forces you were talking about?
That's the malevolent forces.
I'll give you the final.
The first point is that the security services have to be able to chase these communications into this dark area. I don't want, if Shami's point is this leaves it open to malevolent forces, of course we need to close it to malevolent forces. But Shami, you accept there are areas where terrorists and others are moving because they believe that security forces can't follow them.
So people
And the
should be
security forces
told when they've been
have to
hacked so
be
that they
able
can
to
fix
follow
their security afterwards, surely.
Can I just
Surely.
offer
Depend on the case.
a really basic political point? As we've seen this week over Sharm el-Sheikh, when politicians believe that people may be killed by terrorists, they're going to take immense steps to prevent that from that
Because the
occurring.
political price of
because
not
the political
doing so.
price of not doing it is so huge. So there is a kind of built-in asymmetry. I understand that, but that is politics because people are charged with security and safety.
We've run out of time, but Jim, you're going to be busy in the weeks and months ahead with the draft bill. Lots to be done.